Patricia Gras. Welcome to Passion Time. I'm here with Paola Garcia. Paola is a native of Mexico. However, she's been studying in the United States since college. She got a degree in psychology at UT El Paso, and then she came to Columbia University right here in New York. That's where we are right now. And she's studying law. But she studied law, and now she's getting a master's in Islam. And what's really interesting about Paola is that she has converted to Islam, and we want to get her take on this. But before we start, because the name of our show is Passion Time, I want to know how did you find your passion, and how are you living your passion?
Okay, my passion came to me through Arabic music actually, and through literature, which has been my constant passion since about the age of 5. So I think music and literature are my main passions in life, and then somehow Islam came into the picture later in my life, about 10, 12 years ago.
When you say literature, international literature, world
yes,
literature?
World literature.
Specific, like from the Arabic world?
Well, I love Arabic poetry, or
like
Sufi poetry, like Rumi, for example. Of course, I like very much Naguib Mahfouz.
Yes.
Like writers such as this, right. but not especially. I also love Latin American writers like Mario Vargas Llosa, for example. I love really world literature. I love to read. I love to read good literature. I love to read about history too. Like right now I'm reading about Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who was the founder of Pakistan, and he actually had such empowering and progressive ideas that unfortunately his vision hasn't been carried out by the country of Pakistan, but his views on women are excellent. He says that a country cannot rise to its power without the women being next to the men, like being equal to men. And he says that the most powerful tools are the pen and the sword, but even more powerful than that are women. And so this is a very underused resource, and that's a big problem all over the world. But so figures such as this have been hugely inspiring to me, as well as people I've met in my life who are the most, sublime human beings happen to be Muslims. So there's a large divide between the crazy radicals and enlightened
That's what I
Muslims.
wanted to ask you to talk about. Now, you said you converted to Islam because something happened in your life. Share with us why you converted and why you decided to become study Islam. Really, you've been studying not just in college, but since that happened, since you became...
Right. I've been reading about Islam for over a decade, and pretty seriously. And before I started my studies at Columbia, I was also taking a class at NYU and studying individually with a wonderful professor who is my mentor and who wrote a beautiful book called The Quran and the Life of Excellence, where he emphasizes the spiritual teachings in the Quran and uses certain ayahs, certain verses of the Quran to improve our lives. So how we can use the wisdom in the Quran to improve our lives. So I'm sorry, I lost track of the question. That you asked me how? Oh, right.
About Islam. To convert.
Right. It was a very long process because I was searching, for some sort of meaning in life or some belief system that made sense. I studied Buddhism, and I explored a lot, all kinds of self-help and, like yoga, spiritual books, New Age teachings. And again, I went into Islam because of my interest in Arabic music. I began to meet many Muslims, not like Orthodox Muslims, but Muslims anyway, like some progressive, some bad Muslims, some like Orthodox, like everything. There's so many Muslims that you find all kinds of varieties. So first of all, the most victims, the terrorist attacks claim most victims among the Muslim world. So the majority of victims of this terrorist organization are Muslims themselves. So the vast majority, and by this I mean like 99.9% of Muslims. I actually had somebody who did research, and it was such a small fraction, like the people who are committing these atrocities, that it's actually less than 1% of the global population of Muslims. So like the 99% of Muslims are entirely against terrorism, and of course Islam condemns killing, and the Quran says that killing one person is like killing the entire mankind. I mean, these are unfortunately people who don't know anything really about the religion. And the reason why they use Islam as a banner is because in Muslim countries, prior to the division of the Middle East by the British colonialists, there was no notion of a country. There's no such thing as nationalism. So they're not going to say, we are Iraqis fighting for Iraq. This notion does not exist in the majority of the Muslim countries. So they use Islam because that's an identity label, and because they are fighting in their own minds, they're fighting against the people who came and destroyed and devastated their countries. There was no such thing as ISIS before the United States invaded and destroyed Iraq, and has been there for over a decade. This didn't exist. It's not a justification,
well, I mean, ISIS used to be Al Qaeda. That's what it was.
Right.
Base, yeah.
So I mean, but all the colonialism and the invasion of the West and destruction of these countries has only increased terrorism. And like I feel like I believe every Muslim country and every mainstream Muslim community has strongly condemned terrorism, but there is a problem within the Muslim communities, and I believe it is like failing to promote learning and failing to promote learning about the wisdom in the religion, rather than the obsessive focus on rituals and empty recitations and memorizing the Quran in a language they don't understand. All this, in my opinion, promotes mindlessness instead of acquiring a deep understanding of the wisdom of the religion and what it should mean. They are basically mindlessly performing rituals and listening excessively to perhaps very conservative imams and giving them power that actually Islam is not meant to give to any clerics. But somehow throughout the centuries, these conservative clerics have gained a lot of prominence, and this discourages people to think, and especially people who are very poor and very ignorant. They can be targets to extremist organizations because they are not knowledgeable at all about their religion. So they listen to somebody telling them this is Islamic, this will get, when in reality this couldn't be farther from the truth.
Right, and we know that terrorism is an aberration, and it has nothing to do with. We hear both sides. We hear that yes, terrorism has to do with Islam, and some people say it has nothing to do with Islam.
Well, both are true. It has nothing to do with Islamic values at all. This is true, but unfortunately, it has to do with Islam in that it's happening within Muslim communities or within people who are culturally Muslim. Because if you study, like most of the perpetrators of these attacks, they're not people who adhered to the religion, who had knowledge of it, who really practiced it. But culturally they were Muslim in the sense that the entire country is Muslim, but that doesn't mean that each person knows anything. Most of these people know nothing about Islam. So in that way, it's true, it has nothing to do with the substance of Islam. This is absolutely true. But it has to do with Islam in that it comes from communities that are predominantly Muslim, but it comes from people who are ignorant about Islam. So I actually strongly believe that a solution would be to educate people about Islam, about the actual teachings, the wisdom of Islam, not about rituals and the women should be covered and all this sort of very superficial interpretations of Islam that lead to mindlessness, but educate them about the substance and the values and the principles and the wisdom in the Quran, which is something totally different.
Now let's talk about Islam in Europe. A lot of people in Europe are afraid. They're targeting a lot of Muslims that have nothing to do with this. Some say we're being invaded. What do you think is the solution to? Obviously, education is always a solution. However, we are having attacks very often now. So, what would be a fast, or if I don't know if that's possible, but what would be the quickest thing to do to stop these attacks and to adapt to this for the Muslim community in Europe to not feel so afraid because they're being attacked for something many of them don't have anything to do with, majority, and the Europeans to not think this is an invasion and we don't want them here, which is what may be happening in the future, where you have right-wing parties saying yes, we don't want them here.
Right, I mean that's a very complex problem because there seems to be hatred on both sides, which leads only to more violence. I mean, on the part of the Muslims, I really hope that all imams or all authority figures strongly emphasize and repeat over and over that this type of activity is not sanctioned by Islam, is un-Islamic, is crime, and until this is no longer appealing. But on the part of the governments of these countries, they should make opportunities more accessible to people of all backgrounds, because you marginalize a community. For example, in France or in Spain, the Arabs and other Muslim communities are very isolated. They are marginalized. They don't have access. They're discriminated against. So it's a vicious cycle. Until they're not more included in the society, somehow they will feel as outsiders, and they live in like very poor neighborhoods without access to education, or they live in the slums. Like I have seen, for example, in Spain, they live in a neighborhood called Lavapiés, and people have a strong prejudice against Arabs, and the police harass them regularly even when they're doing nothing, like just because they are Moroccan they come and I have seen this personally. So I think it's a matter of not only tolerance, but building an interfaith dialogue and focusing on the values that are common between the religions and the cultures, which actually are many.
Would you, what are your thoughts about the Islamic community in the United States is pretty adapted, integrated, but a lot of it has to do with education.
Yes.
Most of Muslims who come to the United States are highly educated.
Right.
That's not the case in Europe. The Syrian refugees, I understand, are pretty educated, but the issue with the Arab community or the Muslim community in Spain and let's say France and Germany, that seems to be an issue, the education. So what are your thoughts about how to deal with that problem? Because sometimes it may not be so much just racial or religious discrimination, it might be just economic discrimination.
Right. I really, I believe making accessible perhaps public schools, education, like maybe activism in these communities, like people going to teach the language of the country freely, like free of charge, providing opportunities for employment and improvement. I mean, we have the same problem here with minority communities. Like, look what's happening with the African Americans. There needs to be a change actually in the people's hearts, because we have laws that are not enforced because the feeling of racism still exists within. So it's probably a long process, but I believe it's possible, and I believe many people are working very hard to both empower Muslims and other people work to counter the racism that exists against not just Muslims but many minorities.
Of course, obviously the terrorist attacks are not really have to do with so much with the major Islamic community. Obviously, these are people who are psychopaths.
Well, they're radicalized and brainwashed and taken at a point where they're either devastated or very, very vulnerable. So their life is total, their lives are hopeless. So they see no reason to live, and they think Okay, sorry. So I think they're taking people who come from totally devastated circumstances, like who are made to believe that doing this will be somehow of service in a life that's otherwise miserable and meaningless.
And you mentioned this somewhat, but what responsibility should our allies, our Arab or Arab countries or Islamic countries, what responsibility should they have, and what can they do with regards to ISIS so that we can deal with it more effectively and these terrorism acts stop?
Well, I mean, there's responsibility to prevent this ideology from spreading. Of course, I think emphasizing the real Islamic values such as compassion, wisdom, seeking learning, emphasizing this and emphasizing over and over that killing is totally un-Islamic. I think the religious authorities should continuously repeat these messages, but it's like saying, what responsibility does the US have for the serial killers? I mean, unfortunately, crimes happen within communities, but I believe that people are doing their best to stop this. And
are you hopeful?
Yes, I am hopeful. Yes.
You think that these attacks will stop? And why would they stop?
Because I think this is forcing people to evaluate what is being taught and what is being spread, what kind of ideology, and how it is a service or disservice to Muslims. There's many organizations such as one based in New York called the Muslim Reform Organization that promotes learning, promotes interfaith dialogue, promotes equal rights for women, men, acceptance of gays. I think the more accepting and the more open-minded that we become as communities, both Muslims and non-Muslim communities need to embrace this open-mindedness, because we're facing the same issues with the, I guess we can call them radical right-wing fanatics in this country.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your point of view, and hopefully next time we speak, things will be much better.
Thank you, inshallah.
Inshallah.